name's Ruth. It is really, really good to be here. I wanted to give a shout out to the organisers and all the volunteers as well. They've been incredibly helpful to me. I'm sure they've been incredibly helpful to you. It can't be easy to do a half online, half in person. Either one is difficult at the best of times. So yeah, big shout out to the organisers. Yeah. They've been really, really patient with me over the last 18 months, actually. They asked me to talk last year, and I contracted a virus in March 2020 called SARS-CoV-2, and that's basically been my life for 18 months. But Timur was really, really nice, because I said, oh, I can't do it this year, I'm still feeling a bit, you know. And he's like, oh, come back next year. And I was like, that's really, really good, but I haven't really done anything for 2 years, right? I've got nothing to talk about. I've mostly just been chilling out, trying to get better, doing some writing. But I spoke to Timur about this, and we came up with some ideas. He said, you could talk about you. You know, you could talk about your career so far. Yeah, it's been 20 years. I've been web developing. I've been teaching. I've been doing a bit of this, doing a bit of that. And I said, oh, I could talk about what I'm doing now, which is technical documentation. Timur was like, yeah. So right now I am actually in a full-time position. I work for Mozilla, best known for a browser called Firefox. And we have a website called MDN. It stands for Mozilla Developer Network. And we categorize and reference web technologies. So if you're going to code in HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, chances are you will have or will go onto our site to like check out how to write that method or what that property is and all the rest of it. And it's pretty big. We have about 17 million users. It's the biggest website I've worked on. I got really into the analytics when I first started, because we obviously have real-time analytics. There's about 7,000 to 9,000 users on the website at any time. And I'm like, oh, cool, you just watch what they're doing. You can't really watch what they're doing, but yeah, it's pretty big. I realized that this isn't particularly intertwined with audio programming. I'm big into the web audio API. Let's talk about that earlier. And all the documentation, well, I've touched most of the documentation about that on this site as well. I did realize that this wasn't a keynote seller. Some other things that I wanted to talk about, submarines. This was before they were cool. This was before Australia wanted to build a ton. And apparently there's a TV show as well. And I was like, no, what? Yeah. Bats, they're super hot right now. I don't know about you, but I want their immune system, actually. Dolphins, no reason, just wanted to draw a dolphin. I thought about the past sort of 18 months, yeah, because I haven't really got too much things that I've done to talk about, but I have had some space and time to sort of sit and think. I've been thinking about the audios. This is my dad. This is Dr. John. Not me. This is a picture taken for the Guardian newspaper back in 2019. They were doing a piece on female engineers and the influence of their parents. And it was TLDR, he had computers in the house, I used them, right? But I was talking at a conference a few years ago about audio on the web, and somebody came up to me afterwards, and they were really interested in how I knew this stuff, right? He was, how do you know about this? I was like, I'm quite blessed, I can read. So I read about a lot of it. That wasn't enough. It's like, well, did you study it? It's like, yeah, I did a bit of music tech through education. Yeah, I did that. It's like, what do your parents do? It's like, this isn't a date. Thank God. And it comes up. My dad's a systems engineer. He focuses on signal processing. He actually works a lot with submarines, funnily enough. And this guy was like, oh, yeah, I knew you couldn't do it. Like, okay, all right, I'm going to leave. Aside from my bewilderment at this interaction, it is true, now that I have a career, I actually do talk to my dad about it a lot. He has spent his entire career in defense, so he cannot talk about what he does, which is a really interesting rhetoric when we are talking about things like signal processing. But it is really nice to have somebody around to talk to geeky stuff when you're geeky. So the actual title of this talk is what me and my dad did in lockdown. We were baking sourdough and knitting long before lockdown. It's all right. I don't know about you, but calls with my friends and family have increased infinity over the past sort of year and a half. And it's not a text anymore. We do actually call each other up. And in fact, I'm going to wait to move this slide on. So I've been talking to my dad a lot. I was talking to him about submarines and dolphins and bats, and he went, so I've been thinking about cells. All right, Dad, yeah, okay. So let me explain. So I'm gonna end with a nice little story for you all on this long first day of a conference. This is me. This is my cell. So the idea of this, Dad's like, it's an acoustic cell. What we understand acoustically about the world around us is held within a sort of barrier that we have. Everybody has one. Other things have them as well. And there's 4 things in this cell which affect what I can hear and what I understand auditorily. First one is power, so how loud something is, amplitude. Second is frequency. For us as humans, that has to be 20 to 20,000 hertz. I'm pretty sure I can't hear that high, to be honest. But it's finite. It's within some boundaries. There's medium. In our case, it's mostly air. We'll talk a little bit about water in a minute, but it's mostly air for us. And then there's time, which is right now, right at this moment, and this moment, and this, and we can't really move backward or forward with that. So this all adds up to how big my cell is. And if my dad comes along, he's got a cell, and our cells have to overlap for us to hear each other, essentially. Even with all these things that affect the size of it, we do have to be in overlapping cells. Time is quite an interesting dimension with this. We were talking about cells in the before times, and when I talk about the before times, I'm talking about before electricity and not before pandemic, which is actually very recent in our human history. So our cells before then were very finite. I had to be close to my dad to be able to talk to him. But as humans, we could sort of bypass the time dimension because we could pictorially or phonetically describe sounds on paper, right? I've drawn drawn 2 people up on the screen, and it doesn't matter if I say people to you, if you don't understand my language, you can see that they're people. So pictorially, I'm representing that. I can also write down the word people. You'd have to understand my language to understand it, but we can bypass time. We are taking away amplitude and frequency when we do this, and medium has sort of become solid in a weird way. But before we had electricity, before time, this is what we did. Music notation's probably the big one. This is the first time we really communicated complex sounds to each other. And yet, with this, it is down to interpretation. It's not straightforward recording and playback, but we could extend our cells. I don't necessarily have to be right next to my dad to be able to communicate with him. Then, of course, the biggest change to our acoustic cells was electricity. When I started looking into the history, like brief history of electricity for the talk, acoustics came up within like 5 minutes, which makes a lot of sense. They're both physics. All the things that have happened throughout history for us to gain like the ability to have electricity is all tied in with the same things that we understand about acoustics. Before about the 1600s, we did have an understanding of acoustics and electricity, but acoustics is really just down to some observations on tuning, which Pythagoras had done. Aristotle did some later work on the fact that sound vibrates through air. And our electricity understanding was mostly static electricity. Things like we knew about electrical eels. Right? We knew that if we rubbed a cat, things would be attracted to it. And it wasn't until about the 1600s and 1700s that theorizing about all of this in physics really started to take off. The bell-in vacuum experiment, the one where you have a tube and you have a bell in it and you suck all the air out and you can't hear the bell because there's not supposed to be any air in the tube. That was first demonstrated in 1650. And it's kind of a funny experiment to read about because the idea is you can't hear the bell. There's no air in your vacuum tube. But we couldn't make vacuums very well because we didn't have electricity. So there'd be this talk where people go, I can hear the bell. I can't hear the bell. I can hear the bell. And we went back and forth about this for quite a while. But we did start to understand that, and I quite like this, That sound was not carried on magical sound particles. I don't know about you, I'm gonna go with that one. It is energy traveling through a medium, and that became understood. Then in the 1800s, that's when we gain the ability to generate and analyze power in the form of electricity. There's not one person to accredit this to. There's a few things that happened. Alexander Volta made a reliable capturing static device, the first form of battery. And then Faraday made an electrical motor in 1821. And then George Ohm mathematically analyzed the electric circuit in 1827. This is all happening at the same time Fourier was analyzing spectral components. And it was actually Ohm that first suggested that our ear was sensitive to these components. And there was a few other things. Martinville invented the phonautograph, which was the first recording device. By the late 1800s, this is when it all started to take off. I call this the patent wars. Someone might call it that. It's the Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison kind of era, where everybody was inventing stuff so they could patent it, and it shifted what we understand. The first solid-state electrical device was the cat's whisker detector, which was used in 1900 as a radio receiver. So these two things really are interlinked. And even today, it's quite obvious. One thing I find quite interesting about all of this is that before times were only 150 years ago. I've already almost lived a third of that. It's a very, very short amount of time, actually, for us to have gone from not having electricity at all, really, to suddenly being in the digital world that we find ourselves in now. And it's absolutely taken for granted. And I'm sure everybody in this room as well has lived through enough of a period of that to have seen change in our own lifetime. My dad's almost lived for half of it. So he's seen a lot of change as well. It's quite funny because our cells have completely changed. I don't need to be anywhere near my dad, and we can still hear each other and communicate and manipulate. Hello, you like that? Cool. But I mean, communication's the big one, right? We talk about telegraph, radio, telephone, walkie-talkies, internet, drones. That's pushed everything. One thing about Morse code is they were using wires for it originally for telegraph, and they dug through the Atlantic and put wires in, and literally a few days later they had radio. We've just done all this work to get these wires in, but it's all right, we've got radio, it's totally fine. So how have these dimensions changed now in the after times? Amplitudes change. We can hear sounds that we couldn't hear before. There are on the southeast coast and northeast coast of England, where we are now, there's these big stone parabolic sound mirrors that were built between 1916 and 1930, so just in the First World War, before radar. Radar superseded this, but it was to hear incoming enemy aircraft before we could see it. So we had a chance, we had an alert. And they're really, really big stone structures, and actually some of them are still there, which I didn't know until I started doing this. And I was like, oh, you just go and walk around massive stone circles, basically, that we built. Obviously, radar's taken over, but they do use sound mirrors for art purposes and stuff like that. One thing I was thinking about was little sounds. So, can we hear an insect creeping, whereas we couldn't before? Making sure this is plugged in. Yeah, okay, cool. It's a bit of a sore. I didn't draw a picture because I found a sound of a spider, and I'm a massive arachnophobe. Hopefully we'll get sound. This is. It's going a little longer. It's creepy as hell, isn't it? That is, I think it's a wolf spider's mating purr, and the video on YouTube is actually called Creepy Mating Purr, and I'm most mating is creepy. Come on. But that specifically, I mean, there's probably a good kick drum sample in there, but yeah, that's obviously much louder than it actually is, and so we can manipulate it and we can hear it. So amplitude's changed for better or worse. Frequency, how are we doing? It's already 25 past. It's probably interval time. It might be a bit loud. I'm sure some of you have seen it. That's a video of bats hanging upside down, but flipped so they look like they're the right way up, and it just generally looks like they're in some sort of punk club, which is great. But frequency, this took me on to bats. Do you see what I'm doing here? I have some bat facts for you all. They're the only mammals capable of sustained flight. Flying squirrels actually just glide. They are much more maneuverable than birds, funnily enough. That's why you see them swooping around so much. Mexican free-tailed bat can achieve speeds of 100 miles per hour. Bats comprise 20% of all classified mammal species. Rodents are a little bit higher, but a fifth of all mammals, bats. Thought that was a good one. An old English term for a bat is flittermouse, which is what we shall be calling these from now on. In the early sort of categorization of flittermice, they categorize them as big and small. So you've got megabats and microbats, and it's the microbats that tend to use echolocation and send out these sort of crazy pulse frequency sweeps really, really fast. They usually do it in the range of about 14 kilohertz to 100 kilohertz, not very high. They're some of the loudest animals at 60 to 140 decibels. When they've got a lot of organs which help them do this sort of echolocation pulse sweep. One of them orientates it in the right direction. The other thing that they have to do is they have to mute their ears before they do it so they don't deafen themselves. So they've got muscles in their ears. They send it out, mute themselves, and then listen to get it back, which I think is really cool. But we can kind of hear this now. We have to slow it down, but this is a bat. That's its pulse, which sounds a lot like a bird, which makes me wonder what a bird's actually doing. They just singing to each other, and like, where the hell am I? I don't know. Underwater mammals, see, the drawing of the dolphin did not go unused. Underwater mammals do this too. They have echolocation. Again, something that we can pick up on. It's not just dolphins, it's whales too, which include narwhals. Took a lot not to draw a picture of a narwhal because they're cool. But dolphins, funny enough, they do actually have lots of different ways of communicating. They don't just use these pulses for finding places. They actually use sound to communicate with each other. They're actually quite good at seeing as well, unlike bats. Well, bats can see, common misconception, but they will look before they use their echolocation. Dolphins is basically what's going on. What was I going to say? They have 3 specific sounds. The first one is a unique whistle, which they use to say, hey, I'm here, I'm this dolphin. It does go higher as well. They're high-frequency animals too. They also have their pulse for echolocation. And that's that buzzing that you can hear. It's quite quiet up here. I probably can't hear it as loud as you. And then one of the other noises they have is they squash that buzz up and they do this haptic noise through the water, which I don't actually have a little sample of, unfortunately. But it means that you can feel dolphins in water and they actually touch each other through this kind of buzz sound that they have. And they use it for fighting and mating and, those things are related. And if you swim with dolphins and they're doing it, you can feel it too. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to find clean samples to play for dolphins because they're always really, really polluted and noisy. Don't do this. Dolphin, apparently they're relaxing noises. Don't know about you, but it's not relaxing. 10-hour YouTube videos on relaxing dolphin sounds, which start with that kind of whistle. No. So don't Google, but there is a really good TED Talk by Denise Herzing. I will tweet a link out to it when I've got a bit of time. And it's just a 15-minute talk, and she's been studying dolphins in the Bahamas with her work group for a long time. And they're the ones that kind of categorize these sounds and the whistles and the buzzes and the echolocations. They've made lots of equipment to communicate with dolphins, which is really interesting, because we can hear them and we can generate sounds that they can sort of hear. We've been trying to talk to them. They made an underwater keyboard, like this massive thing with massive buttons, so the dolphins could play on the keyboard. Nowadays, they use like wearables. So they have this little sort of backpack when they dive with like hydrophones and speakers and little buttons, and it will send out sounds to the dolphins, and it'll record the sounds that are coming back, and they basically play games with them. It's a really interesting talk. Yeah, we as humans use echolocation as well. It's extremely crude, funnily enough, compared to things like bats and dolphins. It's an area of contention. It's also difficult to find out a lot about submarines because they're stealth vessels. They are used for war, but a lot of our progression in signal processing has come from marine engineering. The sonar used for boats and submarines really pushed the boundaries for a long time on how we understood all the things that we take for granted. One thing about a submarine is they use sonar for navigation. So when you're watching a film and they've got this like tiny metal tube and you're feeling like there's compression around you and it's sending out that bleep tone so that you know you're on a submarine, they don't do that because they don't want to be found. They sit there in silence. So the tube, everybody's just sitting down having a cup of tea and no one's talking. They're just complete silence, just chilling 300 meters underwater. They do listen. They listen a great deal, and there's loads of analysis that goes on about what they listen for. They're usually looking for other submarines and other boats because, of threats, but they'll listen to like shrimp snapping and fish swimming, and they've got loads of recordings. They do loads of analysing on it, which I think is really cool. Like I said, it is very crude compared to bats and dolphins, what we do, because their frequency sweeps we really haven't quite understood yet, which I also find fascinating. We can record them, we can analyse them, but we don't quite understand how they're doing it, which is, that's how it goes. This kind of leads on to medium quite well. We spend most of our time in air. That's how we understand sound. We can hear things underwater, but we have to be quite close to those things. Water's a better conductor of sound, but it will take a lot of power to make it louder underwater. We can hear sounds through solids now, and it's not really strictly sound, but it's the same idea that there can be an earthquake in New Zealand and we can feel it here. Like we have equipment that allows us to feel a wave through the Earth's core, which, is some liquid, but also some solid. The opposite medium, of course, is space. And as we all know, space is a vacuum. From the previous experiment, sometimes you can hear sound, sometimes you can't. There's no sound in space, but the things in space do make a sound, which I thought was quite interesting. I have a little video of this, which I thought explained it a little bit better than me. This is Voyager. Anything you send into space has 1 billion sensors on it. This is Voyager capturing sounds from interstellar space. I think it'll play. Yeah. Eerie. It does play again. I'll let it play again. What can I say? Space is noisy. It does bring me on to, that was my interlink to a subject which I really like. And I did want to talk about it. It's not strictly sound, but gravitational waves, right? They travel at the speed of light, so it's not strictly sound, but yes, somebody has made the sound of a gravitational wave, which I will play you in a minute. They've been theorizing about these since the turn of the century when all of this movement in physics was going on, but we didn't have the detectors to detect them, right? One thing about gravitational waves is most large things that accelerate do generate them. So we probably do when we walk, but they're so quiet. And we're, not moving fast enough that we can't get them from us. We have to look into space at massive bodies doing crazy things like falling into each other for us to be able to detect it. The detectors we use are interferometers. There's lots and lots of different types of these. I went down a rabbit hole in looking into interferometers. And let's just say they're very, very big ones and they're laser ones, right? Let's just go with that. They are the highest precision length measuring instruments in existence. There's 2 in the US, part of the LIGO project, and there is one in Europe and Italy, part of the Virgo project. And in 2007, they started sharing data. On the 14th of September 2015, the first signal was detected when 2 black holes merged about 1.3 billion light years from Earth. Since then, 3 more signals have been detected by black hole mergers. I don't know about you. I mean, these are 2 black holes, like, colliding together. That means in 5 years, 8 black holes have collided. How many black holes are out there? I thought space was empty. What's going on? I was like, oh, what? Some things about gravitational waves. They travel at the speed of light, like I mentioned. The amplitude is described as very small. It's about 10 to the power of -20. So that's 0 followed by 20 noughts, like 0.20 noughts 1. I would say that was very small, yes. In principle, gravitational waves can be any frequency. We detect 10 hertz to 1 kilohertz. This is why we need black holes to kind of merge, because they spin when they merge and they spin a lot faster when they're closer together, because we need to get them at a frequency that's over like 1 hertz, well, 10 hertz. Wavelengths are typically 100 to 1,000 kilometers. It's quite far. So yeah, they're quite hard to detect, but we have started to do it. The interference that they cause is less than the diameter of an atom. That's why it's just so small. I feel I can stop the talk here. We're ready for beer. It's all right, a little bit longer. I almost forgot I had the sound. That is the sound of a gravitational wave. What they did, that's actually at the frequency which we detected. The first sort of lower whoop is its real frequency, and then they transposed it higher to make it more audible for us. I was like, I quite like the first one. Yeah, it's better than the other one. Yeah. So weird to think. You're just hearing a wave. We can also time travel now. This one's pretty self-explanatory, really. We can record and we can play back anything in actual real time, and precisely, it's not an interpretation like before. And you can almost track the sort of past 150 years via all the inventions around recording and playback, you know, wax cylinders, wax discs, LPs, magnetic tape, CDs, mini discs, MP3s. My dad sent me an email. This is the entire email, right? Subject, size of an acoustic cell. Body, if we sample at 44, I always say 44 kilohertz, 44,100 hertz stereo. That's 2 channels, 1 for each ear, everybody. With 16-bit resolution for, say, 80 years. I mean, like, I'm not going to get it. He will. The total is about 3.5 times 1015 bits, or 405 terabytes. And I said, how did you get to this where's it come from, Dad? It's all right, I did the maths. 80 years, 80 times 365 days, times 24 hours, times 60 minutes, times 60 seconds is about 2.5 billion seconds. Then we have to times that by our data, 44,100 times 2 times 16. This gives us this 3.5, which is 3.5 times 10 to the power of 15, very, very big 3.5, but it's okay, because we get to divide that by 8, because we want bytes, and then again by 10 to the power of 12 for terabytes. It actually ends up as 445 terabytes about, and we have to add to that this is uncompressed, right? This is uncompressed audio. But I thought 445 terabytes, our disks can't be too far away from that. And I got some information, it was about 2020 it was released, that they were just about to create a magnetic tape storage disk that was going to be 400 terabytes big, which only leads me to conclude that we can get our life on a tape. Not this tape, but that's much more fun to draw. Time traveling with a tape cassette. Our cells now have been changed forever. I've thought a lot about concluding this talk. There's not really any conclusion to it. It's more of a conversation starter for you. I said to Dad, I showed him the slides. I said, have I forgotten anything? Is there anything else that we might want to talk about? And he said, everything. That's helpful. But he's way more interested in the fact that he's sort of come up with this idea and I've taken on and put nature to it. And we've just been talking to each other in our own little cells, right? He's really interested in what everybody else's cells are. What's your take? What's your thoughts? Like, I think a little bit about how I've focused on nature. I think a little bit about how I haven't touched on how we manipulate power at all. This is merely observing it and like playback. There's a little bit of making things louder and making things quieter so that we can hear it properly or slowing them down. But there's nothing about actual sound design in here. I also think about what's coming next. Is there going to be something in our lifetimes that's going to change this again beyond our thoughts? Quantum computing, AI, I think that's tomorrow's keynote. Who knows? Maybe somebody understands, like, this is all a very human view of sound, right? One thing I will leave you with is there is a few constraints to this cell. And one of them is the longest wavelength that we could ever understand is the time of the universe so far. Super cool. Thank you very much for coming to my talk about nothing. I will tweet some of the links for you as well, because there's some really interesting stuff.
Thank you. Give it up for not Dr. Ruth John. Any questions for Ruth?
Would you say that each and every one of us has a cell that over time, since all the development of technology and whatnot, the parameters, the dimensions has here we go, this is where I stall. The dynamic range of that has increased. So we all have different sizes of cells. And is that a problem? Could things come
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Me and my dad speculated a little bit that before we got loud sounds, because we kind of made loud sounds, we made planes and rockets, and they're quite high up in our decibel range. Could we hear quieter sounds before we had loud sounds? So I was thinking about that when I was doing the sound of the spider. I was like, do you think when we were in the woods, maybe we actually could hear? Maybe not quite that quiet, but the interesting thing then, of course, is this okay or not? Are we making ourselves so big through doing all this discovery, essentially? And is that a concern? That was your question, wasn't it? That's what you're articulating on. Who knows? This is just it. I think one thing we know from the past couple of years is we can probably predict things, but we still don't believe they're going to happen. So I think we're pretty good at that as humans. I think it's all right at the moment. I think we're okay. Yeah. I don't think we've gone too far yet. Maybe, I'm still going back to that spider. Maybe we don't need to hear that spider, to be honest. But yeah.
Hi. Do you think your dad actually influenced you to pursue a career in tech? And if he did, what was it that he did?
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really interesting because he did never talk about what he did. And it was only when I started doing audio code through doing web code did we start talking about this. And I find that quite interesting, that we both kind of converged on a similar interest when he obviously worked in tech, and we did have computers in the house, and I think that influenced what I ended up doing. But I think that was really the biggest extent of it. And maybe I'm helping with my maths homework every now and again. He's quite good at that. It is a funny one, because my little brother does something similar too. And my older sister, actually. I just realised. Yeah, maybe parents do have quite an influence. My mum's a teacher, or she was a teacher, and I have spent the last 5 years teaching. So, yeah, not directly, indirectly, I think. One was a vicar, the other was a odd job man in South Wales. Yeah, definitely influenced, yeah.
We have a question from Graham Kim, who asks, what produced the sound that the Voyager recorded?
Oh, plasma. Sorry, that was in the video, and I should have read out what the video was actually saying, because they kind of just let it run. But they came across some plasma, and they observed it, and it was making a noise. They said the video could explain that one better than I could. It doesn't care about you, Dan.
Give my exercise.
Hi, my name is Jo Thomas, and I'm a composer, and I use electronic sound. And I do a lot of work transforming sounds, either that I hear or imagine, or that other people kind of like tell me about. And I was really interested when you were talking about sort of the first sounds that we heard maybe in the forest, or whether we actually heard them or kind of imagined ourselves hearing, and whether you'd like to kind of go a bit deeper into that. And also, do you think that, because you were talking about time a lot there, and people experience time at different levels, different people experience time at different levels. So, do you think that different people experience sound at different levels?
Possibly.
Yeah.
In answer to your first question, I didn't really dig too deep into before times. It was more what we use, how we work is very much in this after time world. And we just have no way of knowing, do we? Fascinating. We could have heard sound. Who knows if we even heard at the beginning? I think we did. As far as time goes, yeah, this came out of the pandemic, actually. There was somebody who's been studying the perception of time in individuals, because we all feel like, that photo of me in 2019 feels like yesterday, and yet it feels like a completely different lifetime. And I can't remember, it was on a podcast I was listening to. So because of that, because we can experience time in different ways, or at least think that we do, we think things go fast, we think things go slow, we can probably match that to sounds we hear. Yeah, I think you're onto something, that's what I'm saying.
That's cool. Okay, thanks.
Very much a conversation. There's no right or wrong answers, is there?
I'm just really interested in imaginary space, and the way that we transform time through our imaginations. So whether we can imagine a sound we can imagine the spatiality of a sound, and that has nothing to do with, so I kind of find it really difficult to think about imaginary space and think about this real literal space and match the two, because to me, as an artist, as a composer, they don't.
No.
Match at all.
One thing I think about, and it's hard when you're doing art, isn't it? Because you think, oh God, you do anything. And it almost blocks you. And then you have to sandbox it, and you have to give yourself some rules to work under. The idea that you can make any sound, kind of. Do we create sounds that we are influenced by us being humans? That's something I question. Which is, it's similar, like, you can do whatever you want, right? That's too much. Like, how does that work with what we actually know? It's okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ruth?
I think that's a desperate one. Just one more.
Doing this intentionally.
Hi. When groups of people come together, do you think that their sort of cells of communication combine or do you think that they interfere with each other in a sort of destructive relationship?
Oh, that's something we can go away and think about, isn't it? Because that is a really good point. And we have, when me and Dad have discussed this, we've very much been solo entities, right? And they can be anything, like the spider has a cell that if it overlaps enough with mine, I can hear it. But I never really considered what happens when we're all like this. And everybody is either talking or listening or moving or breathing. And there's this kind of, multi-cell, I don't know, organ. That's the next thing up, isn't it? Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I don't really have any answers, obviously. But yeah, that's interesting. I think we probably do interfere with each other.